Our next panel will be chaired by the Middle East Forum's Director of Policy Analysis, Michael Rubin. The topic, limiting the problems created by Turkish President Erdogan. Is Turkey redeemable? The debate is over. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is no friend of the United States, Israel, or the West. Have 2 decades of incitement and bureaucratic reform made Turkey's Islamist transformation permanent? Policy analysts will discuss what U.S. policy towards Turkey should be: co-option, containment, or coercion. Should the United States designate Turkey as a state sponsor of terrorism? Is it possible to expel Turkey from NATO? And if not, what other options exist? As many in Washington, Europe, and NATO continue to calibrate Turkey policy to wishful thinking rather than reality, what more can be done? Michael will introduce our panelists and have a very interesting discussion on this topic. Michael?
Thank you so much. One of our panelists has a little bit of a transportation hiccup, but I'm thrilled that we have 2 other panelists here today. I'm not going to spend much time with introductions, and instead of doing a traditional panel, we're going to have a conversation. And then at some point, we will turn over to questions, not statements, questions from the audience. And you will see that I am not normally a polite person, and I am even less polite when someone asks a statement from the crowd, tries to deliver a statement from the crowd. Now, what I'd like to do, again, my name is Michael Rubin. I'm thrilled to be here as part of the Middle East Forum for the first time, although I will just add, when Daniel was saying it was all getting started 30 years ago, I was an intern at the time as that happened, and then had a 30-year detour. That said, I want to introduce our panelists today. I'm thrilled to have them both with me. To the far left is Ambassador Sam Brownback, who used to be the ambassador for international religious freedom at the State Department. I believe he was the inaugural one. And many of you also know Sam Brownback from his distinguished career in both the US Senate and as governor of Kansas. But his much more elaborate biography is in the booklet. And then Sinan Ciddi is the director of the Turkey program at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which is another Washington, D.C. think tank, and also teaches at the Marine Corps University and has some of the most incisive writing out there when it comes to the intricacies of Turkish politics. But let me just start out by talking about how much Turkey has changed. And one of my old mentors, Bernard Lewis, who I met when I was working on my Ph.D. dissertation years ago, told me that I should always pay attention to political humor in the various countries which I studied. And for those of you that didn't know Professor Lewis, he was a repository of jokes, some of them going back centuries, but quite literally centuries. But I've heard one about Turkey recently about one of these Turkish academics who had a tweet and said something by Twitter he should not have said, and soon found himself with a 20-year prison sentence. And when he went into prison, after he was processed, he went to the prison library with a long list of books because he has 20 years to spend. And he goes to the prison librarian and offers him the list. And the prison librarian goes over the list of books and says, "I'm so sorry. We don't have any of these books. We only have the authors." The point is, Turkey has fundamentally changed. And let me start by asking Ambassador Brownback, how much has Turkey changed and what should we do about it?
That was a great joke. I appreciated that. And I can't start without thanking Middle East Forum. 30 years ago, I was a freshman congressman in the revolution, in the Gingrich Revolution, coming in from Kansas, and Daniel Pipes was somebody that I got to know while I was in Congress, and I very much appreciated his insightfulness and his willingness to go against the trend and speak truth. even if it's not well received or lauded at the time. If he stands there long enough, then people come around, and Daniel, thank you for being there and in that role for a long period of time and doing a great job. Erdogan has changed Turkey, or Turkey maybe was always there, and Erdogan has just really followed the populist instincts. I don't know which would be accurate. There was a gentleman maybe who was raised in Turkey could say more, but it's different. He's an Islamist. He's not our friend. He's not, I don't believe, on our team. And I think we've got to just be more clear-minded about this and start pushing back in very credible and in clear ways, and doing things in our best interest, like degrading our positions that we have in Turkey as a country. I think we've got to start moving out assets over time. It'd be the same as any of you that own a company or work in a company, and you look at a place that's really just not performing very well for you. You just kind of let it degrade over time and move and put your investments in other places.
And
I think we got to start doing that.
Pick out a thread of what you said, and then we can get back to that. And for either of you, is the problem Turkey, or is the problem Erdogan? Was it always the case? Is it possible to go back to the status quo ante?
If I could really quickly, yes, that's the problem. Both. But the issue is Erdogan, you know, when he had the military was going to come in and take over, which they had done 10 times before. This was the Ataturk model. You know, when things get out of control, the military steps in and puts things back on the regular course. Well, he figured that one out, flipped it. And so what you've got really is probably a more natural Turkey, with Erdogan letting them follow the instincts rather than the military correcting the course.
Do you agree?
I mean, yes, I think that there's a lot to be said there. I mean, you could look at it from this in many ways. One of the ways I've always looked at this is sometime after 2010, folks started saying, what happened to Erdogan? He's changed. He was this sort of pragmatist, this sort of, following the accession process for the European Union, being quite sort of collaborative over a range of foreign policy issues with the United States. They wanted to turn a page after the Bush administration with the US following Iraq, and there was a bit of fence mending, and suddenly with the onset of the Arab uprisings, what you started to increasingly see is a very divergent Erdogan. So what I always say about this is I always say that Erdogan hasn't changed. What has changed is essentially he has stopped pulling wool over people's eyes and basically allowed his character and his ideological and foreign policy perspectives to really play out. And nothing has changed that.
Well, let me ask you this. Has the demography in Turkey changed to the point where does Erdogan have a support that, if we go back to the Turgut Özal era, the leader back in throughout much of the 80s and early 90s, where is it a fundamentally different Turkey just in terms of population?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I would say, look, you know, he's been in office for the longest amount of time in Turkey's history as a republic, right? Since he's been in office since 2003.
More than Ataturk.
More than Ataturk. Okay. An entire new generation has grown up under his rule that does not know another political leader other than Erdogan. And that's profound, because he's had the ability to not only influence that generation, but he's also consolidated sort of bureaucratic and state power over these 20 years. You know, ebbs and flows. What you've seen is the complete overhaul of major institutions with people that think like him or sort of espouse his views and project them and implement that policy. But he's also deinstitutionalized the country, you know, especially since the coup attempt of 2016, where he's basically centralized power. He doesn't want to listen to anybody except very few advisors, and basically determine how he looks at the world. And that is not a good picture for us to essentially sort of, you know, follow through.
Let me actually ask about religion for a second. I'm an Iran watcher by training. And in Iran, they often talk about Dini Khodiman, my personal religion, which is a way of differentiating themselves from the state-imposed religion. As we talk about this generation, and perhaps more than 30 million people have gone through the Turkish education system since Erdogan came to power. Has he succeeded in Islamizing in terms of political Islam, in terms of the brotherhood outlook, society, or has he created a backlash among the youth? And I'd also ask this to Ambassador Brownback. How has the problem of religious intolerance grown in Turkey? And what, as someone who worked on this in the State Department, how do you fix that? I mean, it's one thing to complain. What's the policy prescription? So let me ask you about how the younger generation is in terms of religion. But then I'd like to ask you, Governor, Ambassador, about the policy prescription. What can the United States do about something like that?
It depends. I mean, he's on record for saying shortly after the 2018 elections, basically saying we've succeeded in basically capturing the hearts and minds of a vast amount of the population in the services-oriented government of the AKP, as in like we've convinced people.
AKP is the political party.
Oh, his party, yeah. So he's convinced people, saying he's happy that basically people buy into the services he's delivered as a government. But he said we failed to basically conquer the cultural realm. I would say at least 50 to 60% of the country still is vehemently, he's a very polarizing figure and reject that sort of authoritarian Islamist outlook that he wants people and kids to grow up with. Now, they've introduced that into the curriculums of primary schools education. And second, they've removed things like evolution theory now. And now they've introduced mandatory religion classes, which, in my opinion,
mandatory religion classes, but
it's called world religion. It's called world religion, but in my interpretation, it's code for hate everybody except people who think like them.
So, I mean, but what I'm asking is if you're Christian, if you're Jewish, if you're a Levi, which is sort of like a Shia offshoot sect, do you have to go to the Sunni instruction?
You have to take the world religion class, and,
Okay.
if you're subjected to that, in most cases in state schools, my understanding is those classes have a lot to say about a particular view of Islam, and not a lot of nice things to say about other religions or other sects.
So what do you do about it as a U.S. policymaker?
I think we start treating them the way we did Saudi Arabia about 20 years ago when they were exporting radical Islam to the rest of the world. And Daniel, you were involved in a lot of this. We started pointing out what's in the textbooks. We started pointing out what's coming out from the imams that come from Turkey or from Turkish educational institutions or ones that they sponsor because
if I could interrupt for a second?
using religion to spread this ideology.
Just to interrupt, many of you know about the stabbing that occurred in Israel recently in Jerusalem. The perpetrator who was then killed was actually a Turkish imam trained by the Turkish state organization. And he took it upon himself, went to Jerusalem as a tourist, and tried to stab someone. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
He was on an official tour.
Okay, that I didn't realize.
On the Anet tour.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Ambassador.
Turkey is using the same play that Saudi Arabia did 20, 25 years ago when they were really pushing the radical clerics around the world that radicalized much of Islam. Much of Islam in many places around the world was not radical. And then the Saudis started exporting all these radical imams or bringing imams into Saudi Arabia, which is an easier draw because you got Mecca, Medina there. To educate and to radicalize it. Well, then you had these countries start pulling back saying, whoa. We're going to start educating our own imams. So Indonesia now does this. Uzbekistan now does this of other more moderate, trying to move more moderate Islam. And I think we have to take that same playbook, only Turkey has been more subtle about it. I mean, theirs has been more funding related. Theirs has been, I presume, more seminar related. We've got to get in and stop this radicalization that they're funding and pushing out from Turkey, and it's also happening in Turkey. And nobody's doing that I know of. Maybe somebody is, but not that I know of.
I mean, you may have an easier time actually accomplishing that with a lighter touch in the sense that I think, to go back to your earlier question, is it Erdogan or is he fundamentally changing the country? I think my prediction for the future is when Erdogan dies, some people will remember him, and he'll have an official sort of gravesite, whatever. But they will not have he will not have a mausoleum. I mean, he has attracted the ire and hatred of at least half the country, if not more. And if he had been successful in Islamizing the country, you would still not have a body of the population that would sort of voluntarily still pronounce the name Ataturk and would want it on all his iconography on walls, his portraits up in official buildings. He wants that gone. He's wanted that gone for a long time, but he cannot erase it. He would like to, and I think he's very sort of muddled and sort of jealous about that. Yeah. And I think once he dies, Erdogan's memory is he will wither, I think, in much the way where some other sort of iconic leaders did. He would like to displace that sort of the Kemalist secular image of Turkey. I don't think he's going to succeed. And that's not just brute optimism. I think even his constituencies, even his most loyal supporters, yes, by show and practice, they go to mosque and they go to sort of projecting the sort of pious lifestyle, which I think is in most cases is a veneer. They don't want to sort of raise the next devout Sharia-based family. What they want is they want the next apartment. They want to send their kids to prestigious schools. They want to establish businesses. They want to make money. They want to they want to spend that money in Monaco and New York. You know, they're not looking for a return to a theocratic lifestyle. And for now, Erdogan has been a vehicle to sort of achieve those goals. I think he will fail in the cultural realm.
I would just point out, and I'm going to go back to Ambassador, you in a second, with regard to the conversion of some of the churches to mosques. But I do want to just point out, and correct me if I'm wrong, look, at the best of times, oftentimes, Turkish politics can be sort of like an elementary school little league soccer game where you just have a big scrum, but every now and then there is a consolidation of power. You had it in the 1950s under Adnan Menderes, where the Democracy Party consolidated power. You had it in the 1980s under Turgut Özal with the Motherland Party, and those parties didn't actually survive for long the death of those charismatic leaders. So the exception, of course, being Ataturk with the Republican People's Party, which is oftentimes abbreviated CHP from the Turkish. But so what you're basically saying is it makes sense that the AKP isn't going to last long past Erdogan's death, although perhaps some other parties will emerge from the alumni of the AKP.
Yeah, I mean, the AKP, I would say, is just a vehicle to enable kleptocracy.
Okay.
That's all it is. And once he dies, he doesn't even care about the future of the party. I mean, it's just a front at this point. And when Erdogan dies, the party's gone too.
Is Ankara 2024, Tehran 1978?
Good question. Hard to say. I don't think we've gotten there yet, but I think this is the most interesting aspect of why we probably have a panel on Turkey, because where he's maneuvered the country strategically, policy-wise, in the last, I would say, at least most worryingly since 2016, 2017, should ring alarm bells in terms of what he's doing.
Michael, I want to jump in with another policy idea, building on one that's been very successful, the Abrahamic Accords. In a normal situation, Donald Trump would get the Nobel Peace Prize for the Abrahamic Accords. This is phenomenal that this took place. And we were this close to the Saudis joining it until the Iranians come after Israel through Hamas. And don't ever let the Iranians off the hook on this. The Middle East is going to stay stirred up as long as that Iranian leadership is in power. They'll find somebody else. But we should build on the Abrahamic Accords. We should build an Abrahamic faith initiative and work with, Daniel was saying, I think Islamization peaked in the Middle East, you said a decade ago. I agree. And I've been meeting and talking with some of the leaders in these other Islamic countries in the Middle East. Many of them are tired of this. They want to move on to something and be more open, and they're seeing the end of these petrodollars fueling everything that they have, and they want to have a more open society where you're not killed if you have to be a Sunni Muslim or else you're thrown in jail and killed. They're saying, we've got to have a more open society here. So they want to open this up. And I think if we came in and backed, building on that, an Abrahamic faith initiative, we got religious leaders from all the three Abrahamic faiths that would unite around an idea that our faith does not support the killing of innocent people under our theology just because we disagree with them. Just have a very, very basic agreement, but start to build this with other more moderate Muslim countries and push back against this Turkish initiative and narrative to radicalize and continue to radicalize, albeit smaller populations, but it doesn't take many radicals to really make a place blow up or go bad. You just need a few. I think we need to build on, I think we can win with that strategy.
Yesterday, if those of you who may not know, Erdogan was talking with the Prime Minister of Greece, and the Prime Minister of Greece referred to Hamas as a terrorist group. Erdogan said, no, 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 it's not a terrorist group. They're insurgents. We support them. Not only do we support them, we actually have offered them, we have 1,000 Hamas members who we are giving medical care to in Turkey right now. What was the reaction to that when the Turks were called out on that?
Oh, it's astounding. We're still sort of trying to work through the details. Everyone was kind of shocked, and they thought, did the president misspeak? I went back and listened to the actual Turkish broadcast, and he doesn't misspeak. He's very clear. He literally says, we're treating 1,000 Hamas fighters, which by U.S. standards is direct. There are multiple layers of sanctionable actions there that you can. The biggest question that we have is, how do they get them out? If Turkey is treating 1,000 Hamas fighters inside of Turkey, if that's not a misspeaking on his part, how do they get there? And I've been pinging people since last night, trying to sort of get a know-how, and the most plausible sort of scenario seems to sort of focus on, well, they're smuggled out of tunnels to Egypt because there's a racket going on across the Rafah Gate where Egyptians are essentially taking bribes, and Turkey's on record for essentially delivering the most amount of aid to Gaza. So if Turkish planes are flying into Egypt, presumably they can be loaded up and flown back with Hamas fighters to Turkish. That's the most plausible thing that comes to my mind. But then there was a sort of lukewarm, non-denial denial.
Yeah.
Reuters reported about an hour after Erdogan's speech suggesting that an anonymous Turkish official said to Reuters that the president misspoke. What he meant to say was that there are essentially only injured Gazans were being flown back to Turkey. The only reason why I'm suspicious of it, and I haven't ruled it out, is because there actually is an existing cooperative agreement between Turkey, Egypt, and Israel.
Yeah.
Acutely sick people, injured Gazans, but also people receiving cancer care and all these sorts of cares are being flown to Turkey. That actually is happening. But if you really wanted to set the record straight, you wouldn't do this an unofficial sort of anonymous tip to Reuters. You would want his press and comms director to schedule a press conference and say, hey, just to set the record straight, the president misspoke. What he meant to say was they would do a cleanup, an official cleanup, and I haven't seen anything since.
I mean, there's this old joke, some of you may know, about two psychiatrists who are in practice together. One goes in the morning and said, I made the biggest Freudian slip to my wife this morning over breakfast. Another one said, what did you say? He said, well, I meant to say, honey, please pass more waffles, but somehow it came out, you really ruined my life. I mean, it's one of those, the correction just isn't convincing. But if I may crystallize, you're talking about, and you could, I know from FDD work, from Foundation for Defense of Democracy work, you can really go down into how Erdogan has been throwing fuel on the fire and really vocal in terms of support for Hamas. The current foreign minister of Turkey, Hakan Fidan, was for 13 years the intelligence chief. He is responsible for allowing Hamas to really set up its financial, its diplomatic, its technical infrastructure inside Turkey. Just shortly before the October 7th pogrom, the terrorist attack, Israel had actually intercepted tons of explosive precursors that were destined being smuggled into Hamas. So Turkey has its hands dirty, but at the same time, Ambassador, you're talking about how we really need to build up on this Abrahamic faith initiative. And what's clear is that Turkey under Erdogan wouldn't want to be part of that. So the question is, given that Turkey is part of NATO, given that Turkey is institutionally what it is today, how do we address this fact? Is it possible to address the problem that Turkey essentially has a veto power over NATO? We saw how they engaged in extortion with regard to Sweden and Finland's NATO membership. We see what's going on in Syria with the ethnic cleansing of Afrin and other districts. How do we address this problem of Turkey from a security standpoint? And if I may, we're on the verge of giving Turkey F-16s. How do we address these issues? I'll just open this to both of you.
I think we've got to stop doing that. As I started with, I think we've got to start degrading our asset base in Turkey and with Turkey. I think we've got to go to other places. I think we've got to look for other places. And Turkey has a lot of natural features
other
that
places
it's really
for what?
hard for our defense assets and not give things like F-16s to somebody who doesn't support us. This guy is not on our team. And he's now increasingly gotten a country that's bolder against us. Well, now, how do you get them out of NATO? This is going to be a difficult thing, but what you can do is you can certainly degrade that position over a period of time, and I think we clearly need to do that. And I want to throw another policy idea out here. We need to have an ambassador to the Orthodox world, similar to what we have an ambassador to the Vatican. And it needs to be, that person needs to be stationed in State Department, not in Istanbul. That would really throw the Turks off, and they would really go at the head, the patriarch, the Greek patriarch there, that's the first among equals in the Orthodox. But we're talking about the Orthodox region of the world where much of this problem is taking place. And you need a voice inside of State Department saying, hey, wait, we need to be doing this for these other Orthodox countries that are under attack, like Armenia is right now, primarily an Orthodox country, under attack by Azerbaijan and Turkey. Armenia has been a bone in the throat of Turkey for centuries. They've been there for thousands of years. It's the oldest Christian nation on earth. And Azerbaijan wants to wipe them out with Turkey's backing and, unfortunately, our military assets and Israeli military assets that have been going to Azerbaijan.
Let me just, for a point of clarification, I'm going to you as a Turkey expert and as the head of the Turkey program at Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Why is it so difficult to kick Turkey out of NATO?
It's just legalese. I mean, there is no mechanism built into NATO's actual founding treaty that expels a member. NATO was conceived after 1945, obviously, as a bulwark against the Soviet Union, right? It never had thought from a perspective of design that it would have to deal with insider threats.
And the other issue is consensus.
And consensus, right. And
how does that work?
For membership, everybody actually has to essentially agree. There's no, if all members do not agree on who becomes a member, then that person doesn't become a member. And then consequently, there is actually no mechanism for saying, even if there's a consensus on we don't want you, it doesn't work. It doesn't exist inside of the organization.
But it's not just membership, it's major policies within.
It's major policies too,
okay.
Yes.
So they're a Trojan horse.
It would appear so, right, at this point. I mean, it's deeply problematic because both Hungary and Turkey have figured out that they can hold the alliance hostage for policy gains should they choose to do so. And the Finland and Sweden acceptance it took over nearly 2 years to essentially get them accepted into NATO, and that's a deep problem. And you can look at this, what can be done. I mean, not just NATO, but like in terms of policy options. I don't think there are any good ones. For example, sanctions is the ones that we always continue to apply to adversaries, but we've also sort of implemented several of them on Turkey. They don't seem to be deterring Turkey. After Turkey acquired Russian missile defenses back in 2019, which is completely against sort of NATO operations and NATO policy for an allied country to adopt Russian hardware. That was precisely the reason why Turkey was kicked out of the F-35 program. And as a result, those sanctions haven't really deterred Turkey from doing any other things that are deemed to be detrimental to the interests of the alliance. But we have problems independent of sanctions. We have a sort of divided line of effort within the US government of how to work with Turkey, right? We have the Treasury Department, which has been very vigilant, especially since October 7th attacks on Israel, in identifying entities and persons who are breaching US sanctions or US sort of actors that are aiding and abetting Hamas and other terrorist entities. And we've sanctioned those individuals, and we've done it quite harsh. But the problem is, on the other hand, we've got the State Department, which is essentially trying to sort of, one word for it could be coddle Turkey, or the other word could be work with Turkey, because from their perspective, State Department it's trying to figure out a way to work with an ally, no matter how troubled it is. Because if you look at it from their perspective, they would say, well, in 20 years' time, if we take this decision now to really hold Turkey accountable, 20 years from now, what if we need Turkey? And we were the administration responsible for driving Turkey off the cliff and basically making them a pariah state because we cut ties and they became a country like Iran, right? There's this pathological fear of losing Turkey, right?
But weakness invites probing. When you're weak or when you act weak, and everybody knows the United States is not weak. We got the biggest gun in the world. They just question whether we'll use it or not. But when you act weak, it invites probing. And it invites probing not just by Russia, not just by China. invites probing by Turkey, looking at us and saying, oh, okay, we'll coddle you, okay, let's go. Let's kick 120,000 Christians out of Nagorno-Karabakh, and let's see what the West does, which was nothing. Oh, well, maybe we can go a little further here with this. And let's just, you cannot do that in this world today. You can't be, you can be unpredictable. That's Donald Trump, I think, measured in that, which is a helpful thing if the other guy doesn't know. He knows you got a big gun, and he actually knows you're crazy enough to use it. Maybe I'm raised in the West too long and watched too much gun smoke, but it was, Matt Dillon didn't go out on Dodge City's Main Street carrying a water pistol. He had a gun, and they knew he knew how to use it. And that's what you have to do.
I've got two final questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to the floor. The first question would be, what is Turkey's vision for the Middle East today? I mean, beyond simply Hamas. And the second question, so that you're not accused of being Turkophobic. Can you think of any positives with regard to Turkey today and its relations with the United States?
Okay, just to piggyback on one thing that the ambassador harped on, I just jump on in terms of a policy option, is you can be consistent and forceful too.
Yeah.
And we have a case example where it has worked to deter Turkey from doing things that another state did not like, which is Putin knows exactly how to play Erdogan.
Yeah.
In 2015, Turkey is the first country inside of NATO to shoot down a Russian fighter jet since 1952. It raised alarm bells in the Atlantic Council. The NATO Council was called under Article 4 for deliberations. Everybody was scared because if the Russians retaliated and struck Turkey back for shooting down one of their fighters, what would we do? Would we go to war with Russians, yeah. Right? And everybody was worried. But Putin basically looked at this and thought, I'm not going to provoke a fight. I can really squeeze more juice out of this by being clever about it. And basically, he cut off tourism with Turkey, which is a vital sort of economic thing for Turks, because about 2 million Russians vacation in Turkey every summer. He cut off the imports of Turkish agricultural produce that Turkey depends upon to the tune of about $8 to $10 billion a year. Cut business visas and tourist visas. It contracted the Turkish economy by about 0.5% of its GDP. And basically resulted in Erdogan writing a letter of apology and offering compensation, but then also starting to work with Putin, because that was one of the conditions under which Putin would say, let's normalize ties again. But all this is to say that there is a way that you can be consistent and forceful that we've never employed with Ankara, right. Because Erdogan basically understands if Treasury says and does one thing and state does and says another thing, hey, you can play one off of the other.
Got it.
So that's by that. Turkey's vision for the future, Erdogan
for the Middle East.
For the Middle East, well, it's in line with his others, I think, worldview, which is the world is bigger than five. He basically says the world is more diverse and different than it was in 1945, with 5 major powers that make up the UN Security Council, and we want a voice in that, and we want a deliberate voice in how the Middle East is shaped, independent of US impositions, as he would see it.
Sometime offline, I want to find out how Lindsay Lohan became such an acolyte of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, quoting his slogan, "The world is bigger than five."
That's a good.
I think it's a neo-Ottoman empire.
Okay.
I think he's clearly mentally that's the mentality, and it's an Islamic caliphate in modern terminology and modern operation in ways. So it doesn't look like the old one, but mentally, I think that's. I've traveled and worked a lot in Central Asia, and you can really see all the Turkish fingerprints and footprints all over the place.
Do we still get any benefit from Turkey before we turn over to the floor and start thinking about your questions, not the statements?
Well, in terms of benefit, what we're getting right now is it's hard to quantify. Not much.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not really getting that much. But again, I think the worry from sources like even the Pentagon or even state, they would say, well, we could be doing a hell of a lot worse if we push them over the edge. As in, if we are more forceful with them, Erdogan may just cross that line. I mean, they're already an observer on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Yeah. They have increased ties with Russia. I mean, they have very sophisticated ties with Russia, right? And he's hedging between both the Western camp that he's a member of, alliance-wise and institutionally, but he also has one foot that he's dangling in the other, saying, if I don't get what I want, to us and our Western allies, then I may just cross that threshold. So it keeps that level of unpredictability, which makes it difficult for us to guess, so is there anything we good out of it? Not really, but he's dangling.
What do you say, Ambassador?
I want to just, before we go to question with this point, the word of our era right now is acceleration. Everything's moving faster. These changes and these alliance realignments are moving faster than they've ever done before. We're used to kind of okay, this will take several years for this to develop, happening in months. Russia flipping from Armenia to Azerbaijan, Turkey trying to line somewhere else up to really, I don't think they want to align with the Chinese. I think they want to align with Turkey. I think they want a bigger Turkish in a multipolar world, but they want it Islamized, and that they think they can put a lot into that. And I think we have to then move with acceleration. I was watching the NBA playoffs last night for a little bit, and I thought, man, how fast these guys move and how big. And if you watch the same game 20 years ago, the guys aren't quite as big and they don't move. The speed of the game has gone up. The speed of the foreign policy and defense game has gone up. And we've got to move faster with it, and we've got to be more nimble and move with it. Acceleration is the word of the day.
Actually, one final question, a little bit on this track. We've talked offline, Ambassador, when we traveled to Armenia together, about how religious freedom is oftentimes the canary in the coal mine. Diplomats can say that reform is working and so forth, but if you don't have religious freedom, it doesn't matter whether it's China with the Uyghur. It really does show where a country or regime is heading.
It does.
Okay, the question I have, should the Jews in Turkey stay or go? And it's sad that we even have to ask this question. And I don't know is a perfectly fine answer.
Yeah.
How many have already left?
Yeah.
A lot.
I would think that'd be, if I were them and it was my family, I would be leaving.
Okay.
And it doesn't, because it doesn't take a lot. I was governor of Kansas, and we had an attack on a synagogue in Kansas, and I condemned it, and we put extra police officers in there. And it was a guy, he was a Christian guy, and he ended up shooting some Christians. He didn't shoot Jewish people. But my point of it doesn't take very many. It just takes a couple that are crazy and that want to kill somebody. And then you're off to the races.
Any final word?
Yeah, I would say, even if you're a Muslim in Turkey, the majority of which the country is, I would argue you don't have religious freedom.
Yeah.
In Turkey, recently a relatively famous artist died, and in his will, basically, he said he didn't want a Muslim burying, that he wanted to be cremated. He was buried with a full imam, sort of funeral service. There's no cremation service for Muslims in Turkey. You cannot designate how you get die and get buried. You have to have the official thing. In terms of the Jews, look, that was the largest remaining minority population in Turkey, which has existed inside of Turkey since basically the 1490s, yeah. Right? Originally from Spain and Portugal. Yeah. And Turkish Jews are amongst the most fiercely proud of being Turkish. They have very deep ties, and before Israel was founded, there was at least close to a couple of 100,000 of them, if I'm not mistaken. That figure today is down to about 15,000, and most of it was over 25, I would say, about 10 years ago. That exodus of about 10,000 in the last few years is because they're extremely worried about what Erdogan's doing. But it's hard for them to transition out of Turkey, go to countries like the US or back to Portugal and Spain, less so to Israel, because for them, it's all these other foreign countries, right? They don't know what to do with themselves. And the older they are, the more traumatic it is for them to leave their country.
Okay. During the question and answers, because I forgot to ask the question, if you can't think of a really poignant question, ask about the conversion of churches to mosques. I won't ask it, but if one of you wants to do it, it will be fine. The other thing I want to do is just close. Look, my father-in-law is a Russian refusenik, a Soviet refusenik, and he tells a Russian joke about the difference between a Russian optimist and a Russian pessimist. The Russian pessimist is the one who says, things have never been so bad. War, famine, economy, health. they couldn't possibly get worse. And the Russian optimist is one who says, no, 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 they can always get worse. So perhaps this is an optimistic panel about Turkey. But with that, really, and we're also going to play Jeopardy rules. And by that, I mean you can ask as many questions as you want, but I'm only going to direct the first one to be answered. Okay, so let's try to get as many questions in as possible. Yes, sir.
Can you address the Iranian-Turkish rivalry? You know, in
Yes.
Turkey is a Sunni state that is rivaling the Shia Iranian for influence.
Okay. Do one of you want to take this?
You or both you guys take it. Somebody here.
I mean, Turkey has been promising, or promised, I should say, the safety of Ukrainian Tatars since the invasion of Ukraine in 2014 by Little Green Men. And it really hasn't followed through with it. But also Turkey has essentially been promising sort of, you know, the sanctity and safety of Uyghurs in China, which it really hasn't followed through with because, again, it's China. And right now, it's not interested in following up by, you know, offering its support, you know, significant or substantive support to protecting Ukrainian Muslims that are remnants of the Ottoman Empire, I should say, mainly because, you know, he's staring down Mr. Putin, and he has no interest. Erdogan has no interest in shaking that boat. You know, it's just too problematic for him, and he's just not going to move on that.
Okay.
Okay. Since you're offering us a chance to ask as many questions.
No, I seriously just one.
Okay. I had two, but okay. Every now and then, we see that local elections go against Erdogan and his parties. Does that mean that still under Erdogan today, there are free elections?
Great question.
This is my estimation of it. I think as a politician, I think he is crested and he's coming down. And so what you're starting to see is the undergrowth growing up underneath it. And you'll see that expressed in more liberalized areas. And you'll start seeing them winning local elections before they're able to push through at the top, would be my view, my interpretation of that.
I can answer your question with a question, which is to say, do elections in Turkey still matter? And the answer would seem to be yes. I mean, you look at the two different elections, both in Russia and Turkey, right? Erdogan got, you know, clobbered just a month ago, right? He is not in charge of local governance in Turkey. And that may not matter much to some, but local governance is the key to governing Turkey. They want local governments because that's where the corruption happens. That's where the money is, right? Zoning, permits, construction, all of that. They don't have access to most of that, which means they cannot essentially finance their political machine. And you have less reason as a construction tycoon or a person with significant assets and capital to offer your support to Erdogan because you're looking, well, who's going to give me permits? And you're looking to, well, the opposition guy who won it, who's going to be the mayor of this town, right, and that governance. So unlike Russia, Turkey's still a country where elections matter, and Erdogan's deeply worried about this. And so we may see sort of moves to change once again the electoral system or even the mode of governance such that because he's looking already forward to the next election.
So it can be like Putin, Medvedev, Putin sort of thing?
Well, no, they're thinking of reinstituting the prime minister's office
Okay.
once again, which is...
There you go. Daniel, and then Daniel, then we're going to go to Leah Jacobson in the front row, and then we're going to go to this side.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for the kind words. Mr. Ciddi, I have two questions, and then you'll pick which one you want. One is to suggest, you mentioned that there was a transition by Erdogan around 2010. I thought it's the July 2011 meeting with the heads of the military where he took over the military, that until that point he was fearful of the military, and after that point he's not. Before that he behaved, after that he didn't. Tell me if you agree or not. And secondly, could you say something about deism, the emergence of deism as an alternative to Islam?
Oh, excellent questions. Yeah, I would say you could take your pick in terms of what the fundamental turning point that people started to say Erdogan has changed, right? I look at it as 2010, basically when there was this referendum in Turkey over the constitution. 26 articles of the constitution were put before the public to be changed. And a lot of those basically focused on making the military more accountable before civilian law and make them accessible to civilian oversight in terms of jurisprudence. right? But it also allowed the first instance of the politicization of the judiciary, whereby the government initiated penetration into appointing judges and prosecutors for the first time. Before that, it was a caste system, right? They basically appointed judges and prosecutors were appointed. And at that point, I saw for me, that was a fundamental turning point because he felt empowered, emboldened. They tried to shut his party down and remove him from office back in 2007. And so, but what you're alluding to is absolutely right. I mean, that's another, by 2011, he really did take on the military. And they ended up quitting. The force commanders ended up quitting. He didn't care.
Before we talk about the deism, though, as we go into this, one thing I don't see the US government doing, which is relevant to Daniel's question, is why aren't we using what Erdogan did to dismantle the checks and balances as a case study in terms of how dictators or would-be dictators, Islamists who talk the language of democracy, slowly dismantle the system? Are we actually learning the lessons from what occurred? But with that rhetorical question, let me ask both of you about the deism before we go on the next question, and then we'll do rapid-fire questions on this side of the room.
I love the question there, and it's something I've been observing in other Muslim-majority countries, is this newer generation coming up going, I don't know if I agree with my this interpretation of Islam as being forced here on us, and starting to search and look. And I think here we have to thank Iran and the mullahs that have been ruling that country for 40 plus years. It was supposed to be paradise on earth, right? Finally, when Islam ran everything and we're in control and we've got it all, this is supposed to be perfect, right? This is what Islam is the way. And so this should be, and it's not. And people there are not happy with it. And so I think then the newer generations coming up going, I want to look somewhere else.
I would just say that when Ayatollah Khomeini died on June 3rd, 1989, there's a heat wave in Tehran. And the rumor or the quip on the streets of Tehran at that point was that the old man was so senile, he forgot to close the door on the way down. I mean, the fact of the matter is people had already started to turn against someone who had been a charismatic religious leader, at least inside Iran. But do you have anything to add, or should we go to...
I'll just say something briefly, but this is one of the only panel I've been on where you have really good jokes lined up. I mean that. I really do mean that. I mean, I hope they're on... Are they
if we keep going, they're going to get more and more off color, so don't press me.
But can I just say something to that? The deism, absolutely. I mean, one of the things, the backlash is against Erdogan's sort of use of Islam I call use of Islam to make the country more authoritarian, because I think that's his ultimate goal, right? Is to sort of vulgarize Islam and its traditions and practices in the face of the people. Just, in various ways. We could talk more offline about this. That has caused such a backlash and disillusionment with corporate religion in Turkey or Islam in Turkey that there is a big switch off to this. Like if you look at across the school, the school system, kids are impose a world religions class on kids with no opt-outs. I mean, kids are as cynical as the next guy, right? And after a while, people just start switching off. And so there is this sort of backlash. People define themselves as deists or Baha'i or, I believe in a big mover, but I don't believe in Allah or God or whatever. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to watch.
Sorry.
Will Erdogan make good on its threat to Israel made after 10/7 to eliminate trade?
No. So Turkey basically terminated, and Turkish Islamists, a la Erdogan, right? I mean, they talked a big talk about how they're essentially anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, and the oppressed people. We want to save the Palestinians. At the end of the day, it's all a racket. They don't care. And so after October 7, we're watching essentially the trade volumes in Turkey between Israel and Turkey. And in 2023, it hit an all-time high of about $7 billion a year, and it's quite lucrative. And some of the contractors who are making the most money out of that for trade volume on the Turkish side are government officials and Erdogan's family, including his son, that are shipping all sorts of things to Israel, such as explosives, sheet metal, aluminum. Israel used to get 65 to 70% of its concrete from Turkey, right? The interesting thing is there was so much public pressure, people saying, well, hang on a minute. so you want, Israel to be held accountable for, killing Palestinians, quote unquote, right? But you're selling stuff to them. So why? And they try to brush that off initially and say, well, that's trade and it's existing contracts. And people really double down and say, well, no, hang on a minute. You can't have it both ways. I mean, that's just duplicity. This is why I call it a racket, because they're insincere. All they care about is making money, right? It's not, they're just using the name of God and religion, right, and Islam to basically continue whatever they're doing. And then things came to a head after the local elections where Erdogan got hammered, maybe in part because of this sort of duplicitous stance on trade with Israel. Now they've completely cut off trade ties. They issued a proclamation, the government ruled saying all trade with Israel has to stop. Again, if you look at what's going on behind the scenes, so the Turkish exporters are now shipping that stuff to places like, for example, Slovenia. And then from Slovenia, it gets sort of whitewashed and exports it to Israel as Slovenian goods, and then they buy that. It's still going on. I don't know to what extent, how large it is, but money's money, and that's all they care about.
Yes. Sinan.
Thank you. So I would like to ask, as there is no clear policy till now toward Turkey, what is doing the Caliphate of Islam, Erdogan, in Syria, supporting the military groups who are occupying Afrin and committing a lot of violation there. What do you think is the policy should be to stop that? And just following questions.
No, let's take that question first, Sanam. But before we put the mic down so that people can talk to you offline as well, could you just briefly introduce yourself and who you're representing?
Yes, I'm Sida Mohammed, the U.S. representative of Syrian Democratic Council. I am a Kurdish woman from Afrin, whom my family has been displaced, running out because of these military groups, Islamist groups.
Got it. And the Syrian Democratic Council basically runs the northeast of Syria, not the Bashar al-Assad portion, but the portion which is allied with the United States and which the U.S. military is operating in. So I'm going to direct you guys to answer the question with regard to the Turkish support for various groups in Syria, especially jihadist groups. And if I may, to Ambassador Brownback, look, you've been to Armenia and so forth, and you've heard all these reports, there's been captured people, of how the Turks had brought al-Qaeda affiliated groups that members that they had sponsored in Syria and Libya, and they had them fight to ethnically cleanse the Christians in Nagorno-Karabakh. So I turn the floor back over to you guys.
I think we've got to become much more direct, clear, confrontational, and I think we should use economic sanctions. And I want to give you just one quick example of that. When it was an American pastor, Andrew Brunson, was being held in a Turkish prison and became a cause celeb. This thing was kind of bouncing around, and in the bureaucracy, people were coming up with little bitty answers to it. It bounces up to Trump, and he says, look, I'm going to sanction the steel and aluminum exports into the United States from Turkey. I'm going to put a 75% tariff on them. And Brunson becomes the most expensive political prisoner in the world immediately, and within 6 months, he's out of jail. It tanked their stock market temporarily. It had the impact there. I think we need to start using those sorts of clear tools and tie them very clearly. And these are things that we can and we should do. And if we never actually do anything towards Erdogan, you're just going to keep pushing it. It's just going to keep happening, only it'll become more aggressive and worse. You actually have to not only growl, you have to bite.
Do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, Sana raises very interesting points from particular, both her people's security, but also vital U.S. interests, right? Which is, well, we've kind of forgotten about ISIS, right? It's kind of gone and dead. And that's the reason why we initially partnered with Syrian forces, the Kurdish forces, right, to undermine it, because they're on the ground, they're motivated, they have a clear interest in eliminating ISIS, and they're also very capable and work very effectively with the U.S. military to undermine, degrade, and at some level eliminate ISIS. But we were just talking before this, it appears that we should all be on the watch saying ISIS is not gone, right? Right now, if you look inside of northern Syria, where SDF forces exist alongside with US forces, what you have are ISIS prisons, right, with thousands of captured and detained and imprisoned ISIS fighters, right? And the Turks, the Turkish military has been striking, militarily striking with howitzers, with plane bombings, drones, whatever, right? Non-stop and increasingly so since the October 7 attacks, because nobody's paying attention. Turkey's hitting Kurdish forces because Turkey identifies them as terrorists and that they have to be taken out. The United States is basically saying, hang on a minute, no, but it's not being forceful per the ambassador's sort of suggestion here. And I've been on the record saying, look, we need to read them the Riot Act, right? In terms of stop targeting our Kurdish partners, one, stop endangering US forces in the region which are essentially working with them, because the biggest problem is if the Turks and the Syrian Kurds have to fight each other, who's going to man and protect the ISIS prisons? Right? That's not a done deal. If those prisons break out, right? I don't think those guys are essentially going to go and take a holiday in the Bahamas. They're essentially going to get armed and equipped, and we're going to see a replay of what we saw in the early 2010s, and we'll have to do it all over again.
As we prepare to take the next question, just to summarize this, sometimes in the news, you will see discussion about whether the Turks are about to launch an operation into Syria. The prison where most of the Islamic State prisoners are now is called Al-Hol, H-O-L. And the fear is, basically, that if Turkey strikes at the people who are the prison guards, then suddenly you have thousands of people who are even more indoctrinated than the initial Islamic State, because they've been raised in this prison. They can't, the French won't take them back, the Germans won't take them back, and so forth. If they scatter, where are they scattering to? Chances are they're not going to be scattering to Iraq, which would not have no compunction about killing them. Instead, they're probably going to make their way through Turkey to Europe. And if you have thousands of Islamic State people, some of whom speak native French, native German, and so forth, what will happen? That's the policy implication that we're watching behind the scenes. But, sir.
Your question about being consistent and forceful in terms of containing Turkey, is there a way we could develop a global strategy or alliance around that in the way that you have India and France defending the Christians in Armenia against Turkish forces and military in Azerbaijan? Can we use these countries to develop some sort of an alliance in a more contained strategy?
And before we answer that question, I just want to single you out, because you're from Kashmir.
Correct.
There is a growing tendency. We hear about Turkey in terms of the West, but Turkey has been providing drones and drone technology to some of the Pakistani terrorist groups operating in Kashmir. And these are the same groups that were responsible, for example, for the 2008 Mumbai attacks and so forth. And I'll answer this question. I'm happy to say that the Middle East Forum is working behind the scenes, but in ways which we can talk about. Not only, with people that have many of the same interests, because the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so when we're working not only with free Iranians and people in Israel and so forth, anti-Islamists, people who truly believe in religious tolerance, but we're also working in the Eastern Mediterranean with the Greeks, with the Armenians. If Amtrak hadn't gotten in the way, our third panelist today was the son of Azerbaijan's leading dissident. And we're working, of course, finding ways to cooperate with the Hindu American Foundation. So I do want to give a shout out beyond the scenes. There's a lot going on which your support helps allow. And with that, I'm just looking at the clock. We have time for one more quick question right over there.
My question is, we talked about a little bit about the neo-Ottoman movement. I just wanted to know how that resonated with all the stands, Kazakhstan and all that. In regards also to the relationship to Putin, I don't know how the stands feel about Putin wanting to take over like he's trying to do with Ukraine.
Got it. 1 minute to answer, and then we'll close the panel.
The stand, this is my estimation of the stands, and I've worked with these guys for quite a period of time. They're interested in themselves. They're former Soviets. They're secularist. They want to keep Islam out. They want to keep Russia out, and they want to run this place because it's mine. So they'll work with any of them. They want their investment, but they don't want them running the place. They don't want Turkish-trained clerics coming in. They don't want Russian military running the place. Now, the Kazakhs brought them in for a little bit to clean up a problem they had and then shipped them back out. My sense of it is that they're just trying to play everybody in the region to maintain their own control that they have of the place. But they'll have Turkish money coming in. They have no problem with that. Just, I don't want the radicalized cleric.
Sinan, 20 seconds on the Ottomanism.
Oh yeah, they tried that and nobody wants it.
Okay, and I'll just conclude by saying one of the problems we faced is that Turkey has a much fonder remembrance of the Ottoman Empire than many of its subject peoples do.
You have to end with a joke.
We'll go out for drinks later, and then there will be some more. Not while the cameras are on. With that, I want to turn the floor back over to the director of the Middle East Forum, Greg Roman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Brown, Sinan, Michael Rubin.